to The Loneliness Industry, a podcast where we decode the societal bullshit that parades as wisdom and yet serves to keep you stuck. If this is your first listen, I'm Jordan Rain, a philosophy graduate with a severe allergy to self-help gurus, and my own way out of debilitating loneliness began when I realised that the very discourses claiming to solve our problems really just cleverly perpetuate them. Now, for those of you who are already following, I wanted to take a minute first to express my deep gratitude to you all. I'm honestly pretty stunned by the responses to the first real episode, the first full-length episode. I didn't know what to expect, and I certainly didn't expect that many listens. But really, the big surprise was the comments and the emails and the resonance of the theme. And of course, one part of me thinks it's kind of tragic that there is that much resonance, because it means that so many of us are experiencing atomization, isolation, and just we are struggling to connect. And of course, that is not a surprise, which is what this podcast is about. But I wanted to thank you guys. It is an honor for me to read those stories, and thank you for the trust and its connection. Thank you. So this is going out to all of you, and for anyone who's ever been told that they were the problem for their loneliness, and anyone who's just struggling to fit in to something that never felt right. You are welcome here, and I'm really glad that you exist. And for this episode, I'm continuing to lay the foundations for what's to come. So that means unpacking more core values embedded in Western capitalism. To remind you too, these values don't hang in isolation. They make up a full spectrum system of meaning, and they reinforce and reshape each other, coalescing into what we recognise as good, beneficial, and healthy. And by extension, they also define what is bad, harmful, and undesirable. We'll see a lot of that today. And I've decided to do one value per week because there really is a lot to each of these. So if you haven't listened to the previous episode, which is on individualism and the hero narrative that supports it, they're serious cornerstones of Western culture in terms of what we value. So please do go back and have a listen to those if you haven't already. Understanding these as vital parts of the framework of our values is crucial, not just for critiquing economic and political systems and things like that, but for recognising how deeply these values structure the way we think about success, about well-being, about personal relationships and connection, or the lack thereof. So this week, we are dealing with control as both an aspiration and an obligation. Next week, we're delving into cognitive primacy, and the competition mentality will be the week after that. And as for all of these values, I'm going to deal with, for control this week, what it is, why it has appeal or some kind of payoff, and finally, of course, the shadow side of those values, and particularly in relation to loneliness and connection. So, what is control? Put simply, having control is about having the power to elicit certain outcomes and acting to elicit those outcomes. And a Western capitalist culture places a heavy emphasis on the idea that we can and should control our environment, our emotions, our appearance, our relationships, and our life as a whole. Our hunger for control over all aspects of our lives is reflected in the explosion of self-help books and productivity tools and wellness trends and the like. And in these, we are told that we can alter our reality and master our own happiness, master our own illness or success, either through sheer will or specific styles of thinking. And it's all about taking control of your life, sometimes via taking control of your mind, as in the cult of positive thinking, which we get to next week, and other times via doing the right set of actions and behaviours to ensure a specific outcome, or avoiding specific actions and behaviours. So let's look a bit deeper at what's behind this lust for control and why the idea holds so much appeal for us, because, as I always say, we wouldn't like these core values if they were just completely stupid. No, I'm going to repeat myself, because last week I said, we can like them when they're completely stupid, but they have to have some kind of utility to them, or we wouldn't fall for this stuff. There has to be a payoff. So what are the benefits of the idea that we can control everything? As you might have guessed, thinking we're in control really helps allay our fears. The idea that we can prevent bad things happening by knowing how to act, it appeals to our basic survival instinct. Right? No one wants to be eaten by a lion. even if today it would have to be released in a mall or something. No one wants to be eaten by lions, and none of us wants to end up with a deadly disease that we could potentially avoid by doing certain things or not doing certain things. And it's not just deadly stuff, right? Thinking we can control things appears to have vanity too. Like, God knows I am enamored with the idea of finding the right procedure to control my menopause here. And as we know, industries like the diet industry, the so-called health industry, the so-called beauty industry, they make billions by appealing to our desire to control our weight, our wrinkles, our muscle mass, or even the aging process itself. And by now, the idea of control goes well beyond eliminating life-threatening things or even controlling the things we've been taught to dislike, like aging or menopause here, right? We also want to enjoy our lives. We want to be happy. We want to believe that happiness is possible and that we can get there by controlling our thoughts, which in turn might enable only the specific emotions that we like. And this isn't entirely just some New Age Western spiritual bollocks. Think that the Stoics had some of these ideas, right? Think Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus. They went along similar lines in that they saw inner control as freedom. So freedom from unwanted emotions, from disturbance, from dependence, and suffering caused by external things. But somewhere along the line, this got mutated into a mandate, like if you're unhappy, it's because you're thinking wrong. And yeah, that is linked to the idea of cognitive primacy, which is coming up next week, some more on that next week. Suffice to say that we imagine that in controlling our own actions, thoughts, or behaviours, we can shape our lives into some optimal form of being. And by now, the idea of control is so popular, it often extends to our environments too. And if you see people as mere objects in your environment, you might even try to control them as well. Now, this is particularly apparent where I live. I live in Germany. Now, if you're a dog owner and you live in Germany like me, you know this firsthand. There's people that scream at you from a great distance when you're out with your dog, "Mach dein Hund auf die Leine, bitte!" That's not an impression of a dog barking, much as it might sound like that. That is what it is. A German telling you, put your dog on their lead. And it's a command, and they feel it's their God-given right to make you behave as they want in their environment. You are being instrumentalized here. You are just an object who has wandered into their environment, and you're a Störfaktor. You're just an irritating presence, and not a human being at all. You're just someone to be told what to do because it's their environment. Now, I don't know the extent to which this happens in the wider Western world, so tell me if you've experienced this kind of stuff. It happens all the time in Germany. Ask any dog owner. It's horrible. Now, I remind you of last week's hero narrative episode, in which we are encouraged to think that we are the centre of the universe and that all other characters are either there to facilitate our mission or they're getting in the way of it. So where people go as far as trying to control complete strangers, this is the attitude behind it. You are being instrumentalized here. You're being seen as an object that's standing in the way of achieving the main character's desire. And that's the thing with thinking always in terms of me, myself, I, and the idea that I can and should control the way my life is. So control and this cult of individualism are very tied up together. And if I have internalized a lot of those other values we hold so dear, the end result can be this horrible mess of everyone trying to exert their control over everybody else. Just go to the Hundertreff, the dog meetup groups, and you can see this happening. The majority of us are nice, right? But you do get this sort of, control freak against control freak and everyone else just shaking their heads. Now, suffice to say, if you combine the cult of individualism with the hero narrative and instrumentalizing others on your mission, right, and the desire to control them, well, putting all of those together, it goes hand in hand with the rise in narcissism. There's a bit of a spoiler. It's way down the line, as I've mentioned before, but those things are vital ingredients in the pot. But let's go for another lens here, right, in terms of how we might experience payoff in terms of being in control, because otherwise it's just sounding very terrifying, isn't it? What a horrible world. This time we're looking through the lens of psychology, and believing that we are in control does have measurable psychological benefits, according to Albert Bandura. So in 1997, Bandura's research concluded that people who feel they have a high level of self-efficacy, and that is the power to affect the outcomes that they want, enjoy better levels of mental health, more job satisfaction, and more life satisfaction. Just don't forget, please, that believing in things doesn't render them true, even if doing that believing results in feeling better. There's another guy called Stankovic, for example, and he showed that belief alone, even when the thing you are believing in has no factual basis, is also linked to better health outcomes. So what this really translates to is believing and internalizing this particular value, control, helps us function better within the system that values it. Now, if that sounds tautological to you, it's because it kinda is. But to put this all together, the idea that we are in control does promise a lot of things. This is why we fall for it, right? It promises a great deal of things: good health, living longer, being standardly desirable to the maximum number of people, being happy, successful, and free from unpleasant surprises if you're in Germany. Does anyone remember the 90s? It's the only decade I remember. Radiohead, no alarms and no surprises, please. Even when, in some countries, the unpleasant surprise is actually just other people living their lives with their dogs in ways that you don't like. So we've talked a little about this already, but I want to say some more about how control fits in with other Western capitalist values. As mentioned, the desire for control can be rooted in fear, right? If I am scared of dying of heart disease, I will watch my diet and exercise and maybe give up smoking. But, as is already pretty clear, it is interwoven with values like individualism. Individualism impacts where we put the locus of control, in the individual, of course. So not institutions, not society, not your neighbour's dog. I am in control, the mythology goes. And despite the very fact that said institutions, societies, and neighbours' dogs can seriously fuck up any plans you might have, we opt for the idea that we are in control all the same. After all, if I have control, then I can happily go about believing that whatever I want to do, I will find a way, regardless of the state of the world, the institutions that shape it, or the fact that my dog might render me homeless by constantly yowling at night and making the neighbours complain. This is not a made-up story. But we choose to think, okay, I can cope with, handle this, and make something different happen. Now here's the thing. At some point, control isn't just a I can. It becomes an I should. It becomes an obligation. Now think of the list of things that we're told we can control, right? It's growing and growing. There's advertisers, the healthcare industry, practitioners of CBT. They all make sure of that, right? But increasingly, we get the message that we should be in control of our emotions, of our health, of our mindset, of our weight, our time, our boundaries, our life. And really, it's an exhausting list. If you can't be asked controlling all of those things, well, then you only have yourself to blame when everything goes tits up. And if it already went tits up and you're still flailing around trying to control it, well, no one's going to have much sympathy or actually much energy to listen to your woes, because we're all far too busy trying to control everything in our lives and feeling like we have to as well. And God, it's exhausting. Will somebody remind me why we even bother? Yes, Michel Foucault is about to remind us. Michel Foucault suggests that control over oneself is, at the end of the day, not about personal preferences. This amazing French philosopher I'm really quite a fan of informs us that control is not just about me deciding what emotions I think it's okay to show others. It's also not about me deciding how I want to look or what I want to weigh. Rather, Foucault suggests that our valuing so-called personal control is a wonderful way to ensure that we adhere to societal norms, whilst thinking that we chose those norms for ourselves, because you wouldn't do it if you thought you were forced to, right? So how does this all manage to happen? Well, think about the ideals we strive towards using control. These ideals themselves are societally constructed, internalized, and regulated by institutions. A good example is the concept of BMI, right? Body mass index. This is a thing that we're all told, and doctors will still repeat this, is correlated to good health, despite quite a lot of evidence that would say otherwise. A couple of examples on the screen, there are plenty more. But still, when we go to the doctor and we're told to, you must control, in the name of optimal health, you must make sure that your body weight is between these two numbers. So this is what we aim for. And we think, okay, I want to be healthy. This is the yardstick. We didn't make that yardstick. We're not allowed to make that yardstick. If you turn up to the doctor and say, do you know what? I feel my best at weight XYZ. And they go, oh, that's higher than the number that we have here. That's not okay. You're supposed to go, oh yeah, sorry. And ignore your inner compass, right? So this is what Foucault is talking about. Even though we believe that our desire to control ourselves to meet certain goals resides within us and us alone, it actually becomes a form of social obedience. And Zizek might also say that this aligns with self-exploitation, where people police themselves instead of demanding real change, like, hey, doctor, listen, this is not how I don't feel good at these other numbers. Let me decide. And so that this might make a bit more sense, I want to talk here about the Ponopticon. There's a real Panopticon in Torren. I saw it. It's an amazing thing and creepy as fuck. Right, it was designed by Jeremy Bentham. He came up with the original architectural concept for it. And what it is, it's a prison, and it's shaped like a circle. I'm going to try and find a diagram to insert here. So it's a circular thing, and around the periphery are a bunch of the cells where the inmates have to sit. And in the very middle, there's a guard, and the guard can actually just look straight into any of the cells, because the guard's in the middle and all of the cells are just, he or she or they can just look into any of the cells whenever they want. But the inmates, they don't know when that guard is there. They don't know if the guard is present or has gone out for a coffee break. So what happens is the inmates, knowing the rules, knowing the things they're allowed to do and not allowed to do, they will start to police themselves because they know what's expected of them. They know what will make their situation worse, and they know what will make their situation at least stable or better. They police themselves. And this is called internalizing the watcher. And Foucault talks about this in Discipline and Punish. He argued that in contemporary society, power works not so much through violence or overt coercion, rather through this constant surveillance and internalization of that surveillance. And it's not just about being watched, it is about the possibility of being watched. And over time, that potential becomes enough. We start to regulate ourselves and behave properly and conform to something because we think someone might be watching if they aren't, and wonder what they might think. And so the Panopticon, it becomes a model for how institutions, and things like schools, workplaces, but social media, society in general, shape our behaviour without the need for external force. And it goes further. We internalise the watcher and then seem to imagine that what that watcher wants is what we ourselves have chosen. It is so deeply internalized. We think these thoughts about what we should be doing and should not be doing are coming from ourselves, but it is a very deeply embedded watcher. It becomes part of our psyche. It's pretty haunting stuff, right? And as usual, we wouldn't do it if it was totally ludicrous and harmful, would we? No. There is actually a reward, because otherwise it's just horrific, isn't it? Social obedience is something we get rewarded for. Adhering to the beauty ideal, for example, that's going to get you applauded and showered with attention. Adhering to the BMI mythology will get your doctor going, oh, good, well done, you're really taking control of your health. So the idea of personal control seems like a way to be masters of our own lives and ensure the maximum amount of joy possible. But in actual fact, the ideal itself is beneficial to the institutions and ideologies that construct the things we value and govern and narrate our lives. To put this in a nutshell, the control ideal suggests that we can control most things in our lives, and also that we should. The hidden element is that the very things we aspire to and believe that we personally have chosen to aspire to them are shaped by institutions like health, education, and so on, and the Western capitalist ideology that underpins them. And what this means is we think we want, on a personal level, to say maintain this BMI between numbers X and Y, when in reality the whole of BMI has been constructed and handed to us by an institution that can't back it up with fact. We end up self-policing to ensure that we comply with standards that we did not actually set ourselves, and we don't even consciously know that we didn't set them ourselves. We think we chose them. And if all that is not bad enough, something even worse happens if you opt out or simply fail in your attempts to control yourself. And that's what we're going to turn to now, when control fails. So, as I've said, the sheer list of things we are meant to make the effort to control is exhausting. Our health, our emotions, our career, our time, our finances, our bodies, our relationships. And, like I said, if it feels like a lot of this is mandatory, it's because it is. At least that's what Foucault would likely say. But the impetus to do all that controlling is amped up by a further factor. The fact that it has been made shameful to display any lack of control over these things. We are meant to be ashamed if we don't look the right way, if we somehow catch a disease even though we've never smoked in our lives, or we cry in front of the boss. We're meant to feel like it's our personal failing. And this amounts to a subtle blame-shifting mechanism that makes us feel responsible for anything we have not mastered in the ways that society expects of us. We feel like we failed. If anything on that huge list I just gave you fails to succumb to our efforts to control it, like when you actually burst into tears at work because you got a text saying that your cat died, and everyone just looks at you like you caught some awful disease and are very, very weird. And to the point where you don't even try and explain that your cat died because work is not the right place for emotions or empathy. Which brings me to the part about what happens when we don't control all of those things and stuff does not go according to societal standards. In our capitalist world, our failure to control something becomes our fault. The locus of blame for failure to control is the same as for control itself, entirely within the individual. And this brings me to another thing where I don't know whether I should list it as a benefit or just something really twisted. The convenient nature of being able to blame others for their plight. Let us remember that the whole control obligation is not just something we apply to ourselves. It is an expectation we extend graciously to others. Others are also responsible for anything that goes wrong in their lives. They are the hero in their own narrative as well. So if they don't get it right, it's on them. The way you might consider it an advantage potentially is because if other people are failing or suffering, we do not have to concern ourselves with them because it's their own fault, and I'm therefore free to just pursue my me time instead of feeling obliged to help my fellow human beings. You might recognize this from the hero narrative as well. If you're in control of your own narrative, other people, they are in control too, and you don't have to waste your time with them if they can't get it right. And given that most of us are time poor, this can be convenient, as I stated last week as well. It means I don't have to beat myself up for yet another failure, the failure of being uncaring. I can justify ignoring that tug of guilt that says, you really should give that homeless guy some cash. You just won 20 euros on the scratchies. And replace that thought with, he's probably just homeless because he fucked up his life, and that's on him. I've actually heard people say that. Hands up if you've actually heard people say that and mean it. Terrible people. Just walk away from them because they obviously believe in control of everything, and perhaps you are just an object in their environment that they may try and control. So, yeah, a dodgy thing to say. Now, the point is, any inability to control outcomes is seen as a sign of personal failure. Here's a horrible, horrible example for you, and one that I personally find utterly offensive and a tragic sign of how we require control, and not just require control, but move on to our next point, how we moralize it. It has been shown in studies that when we think of someone as fat, we equate that to not being in control of what they eat and see them as lazy and self-indulgent, instead of potentially mentally free of body propaganda, or maybe suffering from PCOS or hypothyroid, or simply as sensuous and indifferent to the dumb-ass self-flagellating beauty ideals. And these words for, not being in control, lazy and self-indulgent, these words are not just us thinking that they're to blame for what we assume is a failure, These words, lazy, self-indulgent, they imply a moral element. We literally judge people as being bad characters when they fail to adhere to societal standards. Now, I know this one is a hot topic, right? I've had this discussion with people. I want you to pay attention now to how you are reacting to this example as well. Are you trying to come up with justifications as to why it is a bad thing when people fall into that category that we call fat? Now, if that's what you're doing, you're actually the victim here, because you have internalized the full narrative about what falling into the fat category means. You'll be repeating everything that you've heard about health, aesthetics, and so on. Even to the point, I've had this is a conversation with someone I dated very recently, and we were playing this game called Intensity. We ask each other these quite personal questions. And the question I got was, what would you most like to get rid of about yourself? And I said, my stupid and ludicrous preoccupation with food and weight. And his response was, oh yeah, no, you don't want to get rid of that, because I don't want you fat. And it was just, yeah, game over, dude. No second date, because not only has that person totally internalized all of the things that we think about someone with, these body proportions, this person also thinks that they have the right to make me think that way too, and to make me adhere to that standard, rather than going, oh, what do you value, actually? Yeah, what do you value? It's all about, he has internalized that, so he will reiterate it and police me for me. So in any case, if you're doing that kind of justification, like I said, you'll be repeating everything you've learned, and you'll think that it's, coming from you because you just don't like that. And it really is scientifically been proven to be unhealthy. No, go back to the BMI stuff. There are plenty of people who fall into the so-called fat category who are not unhealthy, and plenty of people who fall into the slim category, which we always use the combination slim and healthy, right? No, it is just as unhealthy, if not more, to be constantly underweight. You get terrible diagnoses like osteoporosis. Trust me, I speak from experience. So instead of reiterating all that stuff that you have so, like a very good dog, internalized, why don't we assume that the people that fall into that category have nerves of steel and an ability to stand up for sensual enjoyment which they value? Now, that might not be what's going on. There may also be structural violence in the picture, right? They might be equally determined to fit into the right BMI category, but they're broke, and they live in an area where there's plenty of places like this where it is cheaper to eat fast food than it is to actually buy vegetables and cook them. But I would like you just for a minute to challenge your assumptions about what is going on with that, and challenge the trying to back up that, yeah, that is really bad. And the point here is that we don't just judge people as being to blame for not fitting into these categories. We make a moral judgment about them as bad people. So what this means is adhering to societal standards becomes a moral imperative. Not really just a personal choice, not even really just us aiming for these things that we've been told to aim for. It's a moral imperative as well. And when someone does not adhere to those standards, we start doing the work of that Ponopticon guard, unpaid and in fact uninvited. And that should not be glossed over, because control goes from something we think we are choosing for ourselves, when in fact it comes from socially constructed norms, and then we feel entitled to judge others for not adhering to those standards that we somehow think are purely our own, for our own personal reasons. They are not. And all this confusion about who's in control, we're supposed to think it's us, but all of these other things are coming through. This confusion is a bonus effect for the powers that be. When we all jump up to do victim blaming, things like structural violence get ignored. That person who's judged as not bodily acceptable, like I said, might also be broke, and fast food is the only affordable option, but we don't care. Everyone is obliged and assumed to be capable of controlling all aspects of their life. In other words, a level playing field is assumed. You can see this because if anyone does fall into that category, they seem to feel obliged to give some sort of excuse to say, oh, it was outside of my control. Yeah, PCOS. It's like, yeah, that's probably legitimately true, but why would one feel the need to justify it unless one feels, yeah, people are going to judge me on a moral basis about this fact? And in any case, with that level playing field thing, what it means is that the unequal distribution of wealth, racism, sexism, and all the other isms that exist, they're once again overlooked. And no one will question the system anymore. Instead, it is much, much easier to blame the individual for their plight and judge them horribly. Now, thinkers like Judith Butler, she's really good on this kind of a topic. She reminds us that what we call personal failure, what we label as personal failure, is the system working exactly as designed. To invisibilize structural violence is what she makes the point of. But I'm going to repeat that because it's a really important idea. What we call personal failure is the system working exactly as designed. If I'm that person that's judged to be overweight and I feel like I'm a failure and I feel like I have to justify it and oh my God, it's just awful, I have totally internalized all of the values the system wants me to internalize. And we can take this back to loneliness too. If we feel like we are complete failures because we have not managed to connect, the system is working, because we're supposed to blame ourselves. We're supposed to think the system's fine, I'm the problem. So thank you, Judith Butler. She helps you realize if you're calling this personal failure, the system's working. I just wish it wasn't. So it's about time we got on to the really seriously fatal flaw with the whole value of personal control. It's something that needs to be said in the name of being realistic. The idea that we can control everything has a serious, serious undermining factor, and that factor is life itself. Life, as all of you know, it's messy and unpredictable and very often unfair. Those institutions, for example, where control is not meant to lie, as we're not admitting that it lies there, they will ensure that you are less likely to get assisted or hired or even seen if you are, for example, LGBTQ or disabled or not the right age or a woman of colour or many other things. You will be put into that position of actually, you're basically assured to have less of a chance. It's pretty damn unfair and a very real part of life. At least until we smash the system and all go dancing naked to terrible techno music. I'll invite you when that happens. In short, life is not predictable. Life consists of dogs shitting on your lawn and kids drawing all over your walls, car crashes, shootings, racism, storms, viruses, and dresses that are only available in colours that you really fucking hate. The control narrative fails to account for the reality of factors external to me. Things like social systems, like privilege and chance, and people with no fucking colour sense. And it's about time we turned to the issue of loneliness and disconnection. And this is one of the more insidious shadow sides of our desire for control. We can all sense that preparedness in others to blame us for any so-called failure in our lives. I mean, hell, a lot of us will just blame ourselves already. Shout out to the family scapegoats out there. But even people who have not grown up in that circumstance or have never been bullied at work or at school, everyone can sense other people's preparedness to just judge us for falling short of societal norms. And the result of that pretty accurate intuition is that we're inclined to go about pretending we are in control for fear of being judged. We will act like we are in charge of our thoughts, actions, and so on and so forth, even when we're dying inside, or actually dying in a way that cannot be rectified by measuring or logging or starving or making shit illegal. And philosopher Charles Taylor talks about this actually. He would call this the buffered self. And the buffered self is this sealed off, self-sufficient, totally sort of encapsulated, responsible entity. And because it's so encapsulated, imagine how good it is at connecting this buffered self. Yeah, not very. It's isolating. And we can end up assuming that we are the only ones failing to make our lives work and that we suck to the core because of it. And wearing our masks of being in control, we aren't open about our inherently flawed humanity. We don't get to connect over our feelings of, like, not doing this all that well. And alone, we harbour feelings of shame and guilt at our failure to conquer something and make something work. We don't want others to see it. We don't want them to see us, because they might see we are flawed. And if we're in control of everything, we shouldn't be flawed. That's not allowed. It's morally horrible. So we don't want to be seen. And we certainly don't want to be seen in all of our guts and glory as a human being. And instead, until we feel like we're up to some sort of controlled, perfected standard, we are scared to be seen at all. Is it a wonder that we feel so alone? So it's summary time. We've talked about what control is, the power to affect a specific outcome, and taking the actions that should make that ideal outcome happen. And we've discussed the plus side of believing that we can control our lives. It makes us feel less scared, less helpless. It gives us a sense of agency, autonomy, and importance. And we've looked at the shadow side. The fact that what we perceive as personal volition is actually a carefully shaped system of things we are meant to desire, and in a certain societally acceptable form. The myth of personal control is actually a mechanism for control by greater ideological forces, and a mechanism for making us feel justified in controlling and judging others. And control is a myth, and it leads to the soft kind of blame-shifting tactics that decouple us from our own empathy and allow us to blame those who are already suffering for their plight. It allows us to ignore systemic problems that need addressing in favour of blaming the individual. And lastly, it leads us all to wear masks. It leads us to feel the need to pretend that we are someone we are not, someone who can do the impossible, control everything, and have everything just perfect. And that pretending, that going along with the assumption that we all have the ability to sculpt our lives as we see fit, it only isolates us from each other through that lack of empathy, through the fact that we are not showing our humanity, through the fact that others won't be showing theirs, through the fact we don't even want to be seen at all unless we meet some perfected standard that no one can actually ever reach. And of course, to repeat, the idea we can control everything is a lie. In reality, life is just hard a lot of the time. Sometimes the systems crush people. Sometimes no amount of mindset or self-discipline will make things okay. And that is the truth. And it's messier and scarier and not something that most people even want to face. But acknowledging that truth is what makes us human. It is what allows us to connect. And maybe, if we stopped clinging to control, we might finally remember how to show up for each other. And that is what I want for you, dear listener, that we show up for each other, that we stop walking on by when our fellow human beings are going through a shit time. And with that, I'll finish for this week. Next week, we'll be looking at cognitive primacy, the idea that thoughts precede emotions, and therefore that our thoughts determine our emotions. Spoiler alert, this has been debunked by numerous psychologists, but we're still clinging to it and even teaching it in universities. I'm not joking. I'm studying at a university that teaches this long debunked idea. And next week, we will find out why and who debunked it and much, much more. In the meantime, please do follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And if you're on Spotify or iTunes or any podcast provider, it would be really wonderful if you could rate and review the podcast, because one thing all of your emails have showed me is, yes, the kind of scary amount of resonance of this theme, meaning there are a lot of people out there who feel like we do, disconnected, lonely, and rating and reviewing the podcast will help them to find this podcast and hopefully stop blaming themselves for their predicament. So when you do that, it just raises the visibility of podcasts. So I would really appreciate it, and I think that the people who find it will hopefully appreciate it as well. So thank you if you're able to do that. The other thing is, someone asked me where the music is from at the beginning and the end. It's my own stuff because, I have the copyright to it and I have to pay. And it's a track called The Annihilation Sequence from an album called The Annihilation Sequence. And someone else asked me where they can find my music. The best place is Bandcamp. You can just type my name into Google and find it, or go to jordanrain.com. And jordanrain.com has got all of the Bandcamp players and things in it. And just a tip for anyone who does like music, buying my music is going to help the podcast. I don't do music anymore, but there's a lot of albums there. But B, if you have alternative musicians that you like, or actually any musicians that you like, support them on Bandcamp and not via Spotify or iTunes or any of those other huge aggregators, because they take the money. Bandcamp don't. They have the lowest percentage, and if you buy some indie artists' albums on Bandcamp, you are legitimately supporting them. If you're doing it on Spotify and iTunes without like reviewing them or giving them a thumbs up or whatever there is on there, you're not supporting them at all. And I know you don't necessarily know that, so not your fault, but there's the heads up, right? How to support indie musicians. A lot of you already know that because I know some of you from my former music career, and thank you for being here. So that's it for this week. And the authors that I've mentioned and the studies that I've mentioned, go to thelonelinessindustry.net, and on the backwards blog page, that's all of the episodes one after the other. They will have the articles, the citations, and those things in them. And in YouTube, you'll also get the names of the people that I mentioned. So I think that's it for the housekeeping. Thank you for being there. And I look forward to seeing you next week with an episode on cognitive primacy. I've put loads of effort into that one, so I'm hoping you'll enjoy it. See you then.